As we've already alluded to, the incidence of taxation does not always have to be shared equally among the consumers and the producers. It really depends on elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply. The more elastic the demand and supply curves are, the stronger the response to the tax and the larger or smaller the deadweight loss depending on the situation. So what would happen if we took this particular example that we did in the previous video and made our demand curve maybe more inelastic? Suppose we made a very steep demand curve. What would happen if we made it a little bit more flatter, made it more elastic? That would inherently change where essentially our equilibrium price is going to be and change the consumer surplus, producer surplus, deadweight loss, and also a few other things as well. We can do the same exercise with the supply curve. What happens if we made the supply curve a little bit more inelastic? We made it a little bit steeper. What happens if we make it a little bit flatter, make it more elastic? So we can go ahead and do a whole combination of all of these sort of things, and we would get a lot of different answers depending on these sort of things that we built up. And we can go ahead and take a look at all the combinations of these different elasticities of demand and supply with one another with the summary table that we have here on this slide. So we do note that these tax burdens don't always have to be equal, and it really depends on elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply. And let's use a little bit of intuition to build these up. The more inelastic the demand is going to be, the greater the tax burden on consumers and the smaller the deadweight loss. So go ahead and take a look at the graph that we just drew, and suppose that we made this demand curve a lot steeper. We made it more inelastic. That would mean that, hey, the tax burden is going to be a lot greater on the consumers now and less on the producers. And that makes sense, right? If we have more inelastic demand, remember we're very price insensitive. So what are the producers going to do? They're going to try to push the price increase on you guys, on the consumers. And because we are price insensitive, we don't sort of change our quantity demanded all too much. When price changes, we are going to have to eat that, and we're going to be paying the higher prices, and we're going to be bearing more of the tax incidence. However, we do note that the deadweight loss is going to be smaller in this instance. On the other hand, if we have more elastic demand, the tax burden is going to be greater on the producers, and the larger the deadweight loss is going to be. So once again, using a little bit of intuition, if we have elastic demand, we're very price sensitive. So very small changes in prices, we're going to go ahead and change our quantity demand by quite a lot. So in this case, we're able to push the burden on the producers in this situation. So therefore, the producers bear most of the burden, and that leads to a larger deadweight loss. And then finally here on the elasticity of supply, we use the same sort of setup. The more inelastic the supply, the greater the tax burden on producers. Remember, if we are inelastic, we are very price insensitive, and we are the one, whenever price increases or changes by a lot, we're not going to be changing the quantity supplied or demanded all too much. So here the producers are going to bear the vast majority of the burden when supply is inelastic. The consumers get a sort of break, and the deadweight loss is going to be smaller. And then finally here, the more elastic the supply, the greater the tax burden on consumers. So producers are able to push that burden on the consumers because they are very price sensitive, and the deadweight loss is going to be larger in this situation. So I would encourage you to go ahead and try out these sort of combinations right here. Go ahead and draw out a few of your own curves, elastic demand curves, and elastic supply curves, and see exactly that this is going to match up with what we have here in this summary table. It's going to be a little bit difficult for me to do because there's so many different combinations of them, and I'd have to provide you with all the sort of specific numbers to show all this, but this is just going to sort of good mental exercise for you guys to go ahead and take a look at. With this will finish up chapter number 5, where we took a look at elasticity. We essentially broke away from the sort of overlap between macro and microeconomics, focusing fully on a microeconomic sort of concept right here. We talked about all the different types of elasticity on the demand side, also on the supply side, determinants of elasticity, and we also took a closer look at taxes and the incidence of taxation. We'll go ahead, take a look at chapter number 6, where we go ahead and sort of model human behavior and see exactly what we as consumers are trying to maximize and what our limiting constraint is going to be. As always, great job on this chapter, and we'll go ahead and start up on chapter number 6 in the next lecture.